What is pacing, and what are 3 traps that you want to avoid when you are talking? Good questions. First of all, pacing in regards to speaking is how quickly you speak, whether that's fast or slow or somewhere in the middle. It's your rate of speech. And this is a crucial topic with 3 traps that could negatively impact your delivery, and therefore your listener's experience of you as a speaker. First trap. Talking too slowly. It's true that people talk at different speeds, some slower, some quite fast, and some very fast. But what if you generally talk slowly with very little variation in your pace? Well, some of your listeners may find that it is similar to listening to someone talking in a monotone voice. Could you imagine if I did that the whole time? Your slow tempo, if you go that speed, could be lulling to your audience. It could make them have trouble staying attentive. So if you are quite slow, you really do need to make sure there is variation even still. Okay, moving on to trap number 2 is talking too quickly. What happens if generally you talk very quickly with little variation in your pace? This can be tough for your audience in a different way. It sure was for my partner and I when we attended a presentation about financial options. Okay, the topic, it was fine. It was interesting enough and we were interested. But the 2 speakers talked so quickly that we felt pummeled. When the presentation was over, we did not stick around to learn any more. We were out of there, even though they had invited people to stay around. This was a live event, a professional business setting, and they lost us. But when it's online, well, the audience could have problems too. And sure, there are controls that you can turn down the video player and its speed. They can sound a little odd if you have to go too slow. And what if you have 2 people contributing to the conversation, one speaking a little slow and one speaking really fast? If you slow it down, well, it's not so good. Along with feeling pummeled though, if someone is online listening to you and they can't slow you down, well, they can go away. They can just click off and you'll lose some of your listeners. We're going to talk about pausing in the next video, which is one strategy. But in the meanwhile, be cautious if you get going and you talk really fast. Now, I want to address 2 other problems with speaking too quickly that they can affect you, and of course that could affect your listeners. Problem number 1, if you are speaking quickly, you can end up with poor enunciation. So even if your listener could slow down the video playback, it won't fix words if you say them in a slurred or clipped flat fashion. Those words could come out unclear and they'll still be unclear and your listener will not be sure what you're saying. Problem number 2, poor breathing. That can happen if you don't stop long enough to take a decent breath. You can end up with shallow breathing, and that can make you sound out of breath, and that can be kind of odd to listen to as well. If you're someone who speaks quickly, just know you're not alone. I can get going too. People have told me, actually, that I can talk faster than they can listen. It's kind of funny and kind of not. When I'm presenting live and in person, I sometimes say to the audience, if you can't keep up with me, wave. But really, that's not ideal. And so I usually just try to be cautious and slow down. When I'm speaking online, it's the same thing. I have to be aware of it. And you do too if you are a quick speaker. Your audience doesn't have the luxury of waving at you. They're just going to click away. Okay, the final trap with pacing is having no variation in it. So even if you speak at a good rate, people, if they're listening to you and there's no variation, it can still lull them, make them sleepy. How do you avoid that? Change it up, slow down, pick up speed, put in pauses. Make the pace that you speak at interesting to listen to by adding variety. Humans notice changes. They'll notice yours if you make them. And you won't have people clicking away. If you recall earlier, I told a story about listening to the research findings that a woman was delivering, but I had trouble staying awake. Part of why I was struggling was that this particular presenter was simply reading her paper to us. Well, first of all, the text of a paper is not designed really to be listened to. Writing for someone to read is different than writing for someone to listen to. So that was problem number one. The second one, she was reading, which, now I want to say, reading doesn't have to be necessarily a problem. Think of your favorite bedtime story being read to you, or maybe you read to your kids. Or think of political speeches. A lot of them are done with teleprompters. So reading isn't necessarily a problem. It is, though, if there's no thought to pacing.
So, how do you make your speaking pace interesting?
Well, if this is somewhat new and you were wondering how or when to change the pace, try to vary your pacing so it matches what you're saying. You don't want to just suddenly and randomly slow down or pick up speed. But if you are saying something and there's a particularly important fact, you might slow down as you get to saying it. It lets your audience really hear when you're saying something important, especially if it's a key piece of information. If there's something that you're sharing that's a bit more exciting and you want to let that out, then pick up the speed. Varying your pace, it's a skill that gets better with practice. Now, one thing to be careful of is that you keep speaking with good enunciation regardless of the speed you go at. Just know that your ability to vary your pacing is a fantastic skill to have in your toolbox. Use it as a tool to lead your listeners along and keep their attention. Let your enthusiasm for your topic put a little excitement and oomph into your voice and into your delivery.